Hello, and welcome to our Wellness Ambassadors at Work interview series, hosted by myself, Lisa Kelley of Kelley Wellness Consulting, Inc., and founder of the Workplace Wellness Ambassador Certification Programs. It's an honor and quite a privilege today to interview Mr. James Kelley. James is the CEO of Brave Endurance Wellness Consulting. He is, as I said, host of the Brave Endurance Wellness podcast. And if that wasn't enough, he is also assistant professor of marketing at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, thank you. And today, James is going to be sharing with us his perspectives on consumer behavior as it relates to the adoption of wellness initiatives. And he's really going to challenge you, the viewer, to think on your current thinking as it relates to the adoption of wellness initiatives. And as we just shared before recording here, James is really going to appeal to all decision makers, anyone who's involved or interested in the workplace wellness and how we can really drive adoption and engagement of workplace wellness. And James is brilliant, and I have had the good fortune of being interviewed by him for his podcast, which I believe should be aired shortly in the next few weeks. And so without further ado, let's welcome James to our interview. So welcome, James.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Lisa. I'm so privileged to be here and excited.
It's, this is a new series, and as I explained, I'm a little bit in awe of you because you make it so natural, and I'm still working on that.
You're gonna make me blush before I even start.
Oh, no, not at all. So James, let's do a deep dive right into our discussion here today, and in just a minute, for the benefit of our viewers, we're going to share a screen, and James is going to bring up his slide presentation. But before we get to that point, let's establish some context for your presentation here. So perhaps share with your viewers some background, a little bit of background on your business services and the markets you serve through Brave Endurance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, currently, as in any business, when you're in the introductory phase, and we've been around for just over a little bit of a year.
Okay.
You figure out what the market wants.
Mm-hmm.
And so as the business has developed, we've started off as a firm that helps organizations establish and run endurance activities.
Okay.
So what that means is that organizations want to get their employees excited about an idea or concept. And so one of the ideas is Couch to 5K, which is people who who are not typically active to become active.
Right.
Or around a 5K run around a nonprofit. So for example, here locally, we work with Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation on occasion. And so we help them create this atmosphere around their organization around this topic or idea. Mm-hmm. That can be expanded to 10K, triathlons. So that's where the business really started. But it's kind of evolving based on these been so lucky to have these interviews. Mm-hmm. To be more of actually a consulting firm where we kind of go in and help organizations get a better understanding of what's going on and what initiatives might best align with their current employee segments.
Right. Excellent. And just as a little, because I always find this quite fascinating, and anyone with children can appreciate this. I mean, I always like to bring in a human element here and the workplace wellness dynamics here at play. And you have 4 children and a wife, of course, a lovely wife. And and you work as a university professor and have this business, have the podcast, which I know are quite time consuming. How do you balance the demands of your family, work, your business, and your podcast?
I'm very lucky. I have a very supportive wife to do these things. And initially, Mary was actually a business partner in Brave Endurance.
Okay.
And then we had our 4th kid, and she has her own side business where she's a triathlon coach as well. So she has her own business called Aim for Try.
Excellent.
She coaches triathletes, so mostly endurance sports in terms of Ironman, half Ironman athletes.
Oh, good for her.
And so her time's already fractured as well. So
that gives her the stamina to have 4 children.
Yeah. And, I think the challenge really comes to figuring out how to slice your time. Mm-hmm. And, I think as any entrepreneur, you work day and night. And so during the day, I'm teaching and researching about other topics. And then during the night, I'm doing this. And
what do you do for you? I
I've realized I really need to book in hot yoga. So I say I'm going to do
Mm.
it, and then I time something else into
Oh,
that space. So, one of my major goals personally for 2016 is to book in hot yoga once a week at
good
least.
for you. I'm not a hot yoga fan. I've tried it. I pass out. It just doesn't work for me.
I was the
I
same way.
love yoga, but hot yoga just doesn't do it for me.
It's funny. I think my first two classes, I had this mantra I kept saying throughout the class, and I would say, "What was, what is, and what will be is what will be. I can only control the is." And I
Good
just kept
for
saying it
you.
again and again because I
Good
wanted to
for you.
walk out the
Yeah.
whole entire time I was there.
Oh, good for
Um,
you. Yeah.
but
Well,
no,
and
but
yoga can be like that, for us type A's or type I's or whatever you want to call us. But yeah, so you've done 45 plus interviews, podcasts to date.
yeah, I've just reached by the end of today. I'll have 55 in the
Good
can.
for you. And within a year, that's quite a feat in itself. And so those who want to see your podcast, you've interviewed Dee Eddington, John Robinson, Al Lewis, quite some heavy hitters in the
Ron
workplace wellness
Diesel,
space.
yeah. I've interviewed three. Is that right? Three of the major CEOs of wellness vendors. So I've
Right.
interviewed the CEO of ShapeUp, Rajiv
Hmm.
Kumar. I've interviewed.
Excellent interview, by the way.
He was fantastic.
Hmm.
I interviewed the CEO of Virgin Pulse, Chris Boyce, and I've interviewed the CEO of Limeade, Henry Albrecht.
And you
And
interviewed little old me, little Lisa Kelley.
yes,
Go
and
figure.
and so this
Oh,
year my goal is to get the last two. So I have an inroads with the kiosk CEO, and then I'm trying to get to the red brick, and then Vitality, and then at that point, I've actually interviewed every major CEO in the space in terms of a vendor. So
good for
quite
you.
exciting. It is fun to pick their brains,
Hmm.
learn about them.
Excellent. Excellent. So let's just jump right in now. Again, deep dive into the topic here. And so, what inspired you to present today on? Because I know there was a number of different topics you could have presented on. So, what inspired you to speak on the topic of consumer behaviorism and really get us to challenge our thinking in that area
Well,
in the space of workplace wellness?
yeah, no, that's fantastic, and I think that the reason it came about was my awe of how people were measuring and looking at their employee population.
Mm.
Too often as an organization,
Excuse me.
you'll bring in an organizational psychologist, and they'll divide it up. And psychology is a really huge part of consumer
Hmm.
behavior, and I'll talk about
Huge.
that in a little bit. But it's all around human behavior, human performance, and
Mm.
that's one aspect. But my thought process has always been, we're trying to get your employees to engage and consume a product or process or philosophy. And so it's not about their individual performance. That is definitely one part of it.
Hmm.
But the second part of it is that if you have an initiative on the books, it's really important that you can think about it from a consumption standpoint. Think about it like this. Procter & Gamble, Unilever spend millions upon millions of dollars to understand why you buy toothpaste,
Right.
why you buy shampoo.
Hmm.
You're consuming a product. What you're trying to do in an organization is no different. You're trying to consume a product, a service.
Hmm.
So that's why I think it's really important. And this is really actually, in part of the presentation, we'll go into this,
Hmm.
has been supported by large organizations like Aon Hewitt, now called Willis Towers Watson.
Right.
They're major consultants in the human resource space. And they're actually starting to go into the segmentation process of organizations. This has become a huge initiative for them
Hmm.
because they realize that taking market research and employing it inside an organization to get a better understanding of who your
Right.
consumer is or who your employer is really important.
For sure. Excellent. Okay, so let's go right into things then. And for the benefit of our viewers, James is going to share his screen. So don't panic. Your screen may go black for just a second and until his slide presentation comes up. There we go. Excellent.
And let me wrong screens.
No worries.
Let me switch that out there real quick. Sorry about that.
No, this space is different for you. You're used to doing the the audio space. Yeah.
So let me share that again, and let me find the right screen. I will share that one. Share, and then I'm going to hit play.
Perfect. So James was kind enough to insert a few of my slides for a shameless plug here. So again, welcome everyone. For those who may be just tuning in, to the Wellness Ambassadors at Work interview series. We host this series on YouTube, and it's for anyone who has an interest in workplace wellness, from employees right up through to C-suite wellness providers, and you have it. So we'll go to the next slide there, please. So again, for those who may be new to our programs, I provide a global online workplace wellness certification programs called the Workplace Wellness Ambassador Certification Programs. We have two levels, an intro level and a master level, and you can learn more about our programs on our website, kelleywc.com, or certainly email at info@kelleywc.com. And just by way of mentioning, our next set of programs will begin on April 4th. So again, another little shameless plug there. It's thanks to James. And I'll bring up this information again potentially at the end of our discussions here. So just by way certainly of introducing James once more very quickly, as I mentioned earlier, he is CEO of Brave Endurance Wellness Consulting and host of the podcast that we discussed. And again, he is the assistant professor of marketing at St. Joseph's University, and you can scribe his contact information there, and we will bring it up again at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to put the spotlight on you now, James, and I'm going to hand it right over to you. And I'm just going to let you roll with it. I may have a question, I may pop up, or I may leave my questions till the end. I like to keep this fairly organic, so no set process here, and you just take it away. And I'm going to put the camera feed right on you directly.
Perfect. Well, Lisa, again, thank you so much for having me today on your webinar series. I'm really privileged and honored to be here. And I'm really excited to talk about this particular topic. I think that organizations are quickly moving in this direction. And they're moving in this direction for multiple reasons. But specifically, when we're talking about wellness initiatives, I think this is a really critical piece of the puzzle. I just want to do one little quick shameless plug for myself. For all of those of you who do not subscribe to iTunes, I now have apps for Apple, for any Google products, as well as for Amazon products. So if you just search for Brave Endurance, you will find my pretty smiling face. You can download that app, and you can have all the podcasts right there at your fingertips. So let me just kind of kick off and talk about this idea of why this is important. And so everyone knows where we're going on this little journey. I want to first talk about the agenda, which is we're going to talk about what is consumer behavior and why does it matter. Then we're going to talk about whether you should segment or not segment your population. And then finally, we're going to talk about what are the roadblocks to wellness adoption. And this is really important. So when we think about the current wellness issues, there's been a lot of research out there, a lot. One specifically is Gallup's State of America Workplace. And not to be American-centric here, so I apologize to the international audience. But they found that 70% of employees are either not engaged or actively disengaged at the office. That is shocking. That is a huge amount. And for all of us in the wellness space, we know this. And it's the battle. It's like trying to shove a boulder uphill to figure out how to solve this problem. And one of the ways that organizations try to solve this problem is by spending more money on incentives. And so, in 2015, they're projecting that organizations are going to spend $693 per employee. So as costs are going up for healthcare, profits may be going up or maybe going down. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is we're spending more money to incentivize employees to do an activity they may or may not want to be a part of. And that's really important that we understand that the baseline of all of this conversation is that we're trying to help an employee, a population, be healthier, whatever that means for them. There's not a one-size-fits-all for any particular program. But that's kind of the current state of where we're at in the economy in terms of the wellness capacity. And so let's talk about what is consumer behavior. So consumer behavior, it's really about this idea of engagement. And so it's the process involved when individuals or groups select, purchase, use, or dispose of products, services, ideas, or experiences to satisfy needs and desires. So what we have to think about and what we have to move this to is not necessarily about who your employee is, what are their personality characteristics, how can we divide them up by class within the organization, so C-suite versus line workers. But we need to think about consumer behavior from the standpoint of, or we need to employ consumer behavior from the standpoint of, how do they consume your healthcare? How do they consume your wellness initiatives? And so part of consumer behavior is increasing brand engagement. So for me, brand engagement in this capacity is a wellness initiative. But the other part of this that's really important is the community that you set up. So to understand how your employee population is chopped up, derived, what's comprised in it is really critical, because then you can understand how they consume, how they dispose of an initiative, and how they actually choose to relate to each other around an idea, which leads you to this idea of employee engagement. And we talk about this, and there are a ton of debates about what is and what is not. And you can go on LinkedIn on any given day and type employee engagement and get 1,000 different conversations around this dialogue. There's no consensus around the definition. It's shameful because everyone kind of says the exact same thing again and again and again. They just use different vernacular. So for me, employee engagement is very simple. It's about how much are you willing to partake in a relationship with your organization. And I know that seems very rudimentary in a lot of different capacities, but when you think about being engaged with somebody, it's a conversation, it's a relationship. If you're in a really healthy marriage, you're engaged in that marriage. You're having a relationship. Now, I'm not saying you have to be married to your work, kind of quite the opposite. But what I'm saying is that you have to be married to the process of being there and be engaged with the people around you during that time. And this is where consumer behavior is really quite potent. There's over 50 years of history and research that talks about how and why people are consuming a particular product or service. That 50 years of knowledge can be easily transposed into an employee environment. So here's the thing. When we talk about consumer behavior, we have to really talk about, well, how do we chop the population up, and why does that matter? And I think why it matters is because too often we use the rudimentary way of doing this. When we think about segmentation as simple basic demographics. So those are things like age, gender, income, where your employees might live. And this is from a marketing capacity. But from an employee capacity, this could be what income bracket they're at in your organization, what job role they have, the structure within your organization in terms of who reports to who. But that's all really simple. But that doesn't talk about who the person is. And so we have to think about this from another capacity as well. So there's 3 core ways that we segment. The easy one is basic demographics. As I stated, income, age, gender, married, not married. The other way then is behavioral segmentation. And this is based on how they feel about or act toward or use a good or service. So this is really important. When you think about your employee, you need to really think about how are they engaging with your wellness initiative. So you're going to have the heavy users. You're going to have people who don't engage at all. And you've got that spectrum all the way in between, right? And so when we think about behavior, it's kind of how often, how frequently. But there's a third way. And there's a way that I actually think is probably the most impactful way. And that's psychographics. And these are basically the use of psychological, anthropological, and sociological factors that impact how you segment your population. So what does that mean, psychographics? We're really trying to understand attitudes, interests, and opinions around ideas or concepts. And so if we can understand that, we can then also create communication strategies around that. So when we think about it, it's a layered approach. So you take one concept. That could be age. We take a second concept. That could be attitudes towards an initiative. And we can take a third concept. And that could be something as simple as the initiative itself, whatever that is. And now what you've done in that little box in the middle there is you've created a target market. So when you're on larger organizations, and I'm talking 5, 10, 20,000, this is relatively easy to do. And I use the word easy in quotes because I know there's nothing easy in organizations. But it's easy to find out segments or target markets that fit into this. Now when you're in smaller organizations, it is much harder, and I would agree with that. But what you find with smaller organizations is that they tend to hire like-minded people. And so understanding that population in of itself from a segmentation standpoint would probably get you to a single segment or target market right there in the middle right away. Now there will be a size where that starts to fracture up, maybe 1,000, maybe 5,000. We start getting smaller target markets as you go. And that's okay. But the reason why this is important, the reason why you need to understand this, is that this allows you to figure out what will and will not be effective to that population. how can you create an in-group and an out-group, right? So we think about in-group, these are people who get together, who have several common attitudes, interests, and behaviors that are similar. Now, what happens with that in-group is that then they look at the out-group and they say, well, I'm not like that. The problem with that out-group is they say the same thing about the other in-group. And so you have these differences there that are going on. And so if you understand that from a segmentation standpoint, it allows you to create, cultivate strategies and tactics to hopefully then get them to coalesce around a particular idea.
So James, can I just pick on that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
So really, just to interpret this, make it really crystal clear as much as possible for our audience. Please. Are you saying that we should strategize or develop our programs around this small, little square box in the middle there, where there's an overlap between these 3 segment groups? Is just to
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great question. Perhaps I wasn't clear on that.
No, that's fine. Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm suggesting is this: is that there are no 2 chickens that are the same. I think there's a better analogy than that, but that's the only one I can come off the top of my head, right? But there are no 2 people that are the same. And so being that there's no 2 people who are identically the same, there are tons of overlapping qualities around that person. And if you can find segments of that population, let's say there's 1,000 people, and you can find 200 that fit into this population that have similar interests, attitudes, and behaviors, and you can find 200 that fit into this population that have similar attitudes, behaviors, and opinions, you can then craft a strategy to provide services and initiatives that meet their needs. And so what you're doing is you're going away from the blanket statement of everyone needs a diet plan, everyone needs an athletic plan, everyone needs a diabetes plan. And it allows you to target the message to those people's needs and wants. Remember, when you think about the basics of marketing, it's your current state and actual state, or desired state. And so if we understand what people's actual state is in terms of their thoughts and behaviors and attitudes towards wellness, and what the ideal state is, you can bridge that gap by nudging them with communications or internal strategies that pushes them to the ideal state.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge just a little bit further, and maybe it won't be a challenge at all, but I listened yesterday to a presentation by Virgin Pulse, and they just did over the year 15, I guess, a survey of the industry, and particularly of their clients. And if I may, if I'm paraphrasing this correctly from my understanding of their presentation and the results, is that one of the directives that we're moving in, and hopefully in the industry, and probably rightly so, is to have a sort of a smorgasbord or a buffet, and not just have one program that fits all. So for example, you have maybe, like in your case, marathon runners. So they don't want a step challenge with a Fitbit. They want something that's going to maybe meet their needs at the high level that they are. So again, providing a broader spectrum of programs and wellness programs that meet the different populations and their needs. So does that fit in with what you're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, you essentially said what I said. So
okay.
At least if I understood you.
Okay.
What Virgin Pulse is saying is that there's not a one-size-fits-all, and you have to have a multiple-prong approach to attract as many people or capture as many people into your overall wellness program.
Right. Okay.
There's not just this. And that's what I'm saying is, if you understand the segment and you understand their needs and wants, you can craft wellness initiatives that might better meet that. That's what I'm saying. And so that's absolutely correct, and I would agree with that 100%. So here's the thing. And this is kind of what I'm trying to get to, and here's kind of the crux of the presentation, is that it's not enough to say I want to use consumer behavior. And again, I want to say that large companies like Willis Towers Watson and Aon Hewitt are moving in this direction. So what I'm saying is not, out there on left field. It just hasn't been used in an organization at this point. But it's not enough to understand and use consumer behavior and segmentation tools, but it's really to understand how and why people adopt the service. And this is the next level. And so what we're going to talk about for the remainder of this is, what are some of these barriers to adoption? Why do people not adopt something? And so if you look, I talked about CB, we're talking about segmentation, now we're going to talk about the adoption process. And these all flow into each other. And so if you start off with this premise of we're going to use consumer behavior to understand our employee population, then you must segment it, which then means you must understand the nuances to the adoption process. So there are 5 steps here. They're going to be complexity, they're going to be triability, observability, relative advantage, and compatibility. And those are the 5 we're going to talk about. And I've got examples on the ground that hopefully then will help the tactics of this, or at least instances when you might want to think a little bit differently. So let's start with complexity. Less is more, right? And so the notion of complexity, excuse me. So if you can't tell, I have a really just nasty cold right now. So I apologize for the overly nasalness sound. Complexity is the degree to which an employee finds a wellness initiative difficult to either participate in or understand. So think about that. When something is too difficult, and you can apply this to your everyday life. If something is too difficult, then the default mechanism for human nature is to walk away. Complexity equals failure for most people. I know that sounds harsh, but that's the reality of the situation. You can think about people who adopt a cell phone early and late. People who adopt it late have a really hard time with technology. It's complex for them. It needs to become simple for them. They only adopt when they have to. When the market says, we will not satisfy your needs on a lower end phone. From a wellness initiative standpoint, when we're talking about complexity, what I'm really referring to is how does it fit into their life? Is it simple, right? So sometimes creating several layers of minutia to get people involved can actually then turn them off. And so one of the strategies I always say, just to keep in the back of your mind, is keep it simple, stupid. We've all heard it. We all know it. But I think too often when you're super close to an initiative that you're trying to roll out in an organization, it's your pride, it's your baby, you actually make it more complex. And so the simpler the process is to get a part of it, the better it's going to be for them. And I think that, again, if you think about your life, that is a very simple theme that we probably should be applying to many of the things that we do. But in a wellness organization, a wellness initiative, that's really critical to do that. So the number 2 one is observability. And observability is the degree to which the benefit of participating in the wellness initiative can be observed. Now, what does that mean, observability, right? So beyond that definition that I just provided you, what we're really talking about is, can your employees see what is happening? Can they witness the effect of partaking in this? So, I have a friend of mine that works for a very large organization, and he talked about one of his wellness initiatives. And one of them was health screening. Now, that's a whole other conversation, a whole other debate about mandatory health screening. I am not jumping into that swamp. But what I'm saying is that when they did that, they had caught many employees who were on the verge of having heart attacks, anxiety issues, and things like that. And what happened is that when other employees then saw that, many more employees voluntarily did the health screening. So they could observe the benefit of what occurred by doing it. So that lowered that barrier to adopting that particular wellness initiative. And so that's really important. And so what I always say is you need to parade out the winners. And that's what this organization did. They put the people who successfully accomplished whatever that initiative was up front in the organization. And that does 2 things. One, it lets people observe what's going on. That's great. That's fantastic. But 2, it also shows the authenticity of your program. And I am a huge proponent of authenticity, because authenticity is relatability. Relatability is trust. So if someone is authentic, they're relatable, and then you trust them, you're much more likely to listen to what they have to say.
And if I can just jump in here too, you just actually described, I believe, 2 of the components of the self-determination theory.
Correct.
And I mentioned that because, what are they, like competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And I just wanted to put that plug in there because I know that you're a big proponent of the SDT, and you mentioned the Drive book by Daniel Pink. And I'm actually rereading that book now. So is there a tie-in between that then? And I don't want to take us off on another tangent, but does that, I know what
you're asking. And I think that the question is yes. Now, when talking about the adoption process, and here's the dirty little secret of so many different things in marketing and psychology, everything overlaps. Like there's very few lines of delineation. And so STD, self-determination theory, which is really premised on the idea of being competent, having autonomy to do your job, and then being related to your group of employees. It's shown that when you do that, there's intrinsic motivation. When I'm talking about observability is that when I say authenticity to relatability to trust, that really is pushing that idea or that concept of relatedness and competency, because if someone is going through and they're doing the wellness initiative and they're successful, they're going to be your biggest fan. They're going to be paraded out in front of the organization, obviously, if they're willing. They're going to be paraded out in front of the organization because they're competent about what happened to them. They can speak to it. So again, that goes to that I am competent about doing these health assessments because it saved my life. Here was my experience. Now we're authentic. Now we're relatable. Now we're trusting.
Yeah, and just if I may, just to jump in here to bring it back just very quickly to the SDT, because I'm all about intrinsic motivation and everything you're saying. I would think too, from my teaching and my experience in workplace wellness, would become a sort of a self-perpetuating cycle that, by the very nature of what you're saying, that intrinsically motivates them to keep on, right, with their own workplace wellness. Is that not true?
That's the game, and I think at the end of it, I'll wrap this all up to get to your point.
Okay.
And I think that we're getting to that.
Okay, perfect.
So this is the number 2, right? So we've had complexity, observability. Number 3 is trialability. Now you're probably thinking trialability. Trialability is the ease of trying a wellness initiative for a limited time. And the reason why that's important is that it lowers that barrier of commitment. And that barrier of commitment can prevent someone from actually engaging. I'm a great example. Right? I sign up for all sorts of classes, but I always stop when I feel like, ooh, I'm committed for 10 weeks. Can I try it first? We spoke about hot yoga earlier. So I bought a 10-pack of hot yoga. I bought that back in October. I still haven't finished it yet. So I committed to it, but I haven't finished it. And the problem with that is that it gives me anxiety if I'm committed to something. But the fact that I've tried hot yoga now allows me to say that, you know what, it's not so bad. I really want to go back. And I really want to finish it. And it becomes a priority for me. So one of the things that I believe, and this is, this is something that a philosophy that I think is really important, is we know that the notion of incentives in an organization to get people to act in a certain way, whether it's giving money back on their healthcare premium, whether it is giving them money at the end of the year if they do X, Y, and Z in the organization, is that incentives never work in the long term. But it's my belief that if you incentivize the trial, not the behavior change, that you will actually get a lot of people to try an initiative. And this trial doesn't have to be money. This trial could be a gift card, it could be a day off of work, it could be another vacation day. However your organization deems it to be fit, it can be cost neutral. And that's important as well, because a lot of people will look at this and say, well, if I incentivize someone, it's going to cost me X amount of dollars. The reality is that you can come up with all sorts of ways to incentivize your employees to try an initiative without it costing the organization any hard money. And that's important, because if you believe in what you're providing and you believe in the initiative programs that you have in place, then you should be willing to let them try it at no cost and no commitment. And so for me, that's a really big thing, because again, and these adoption ideas of adoption and why people adopt or don't adopt kind of intertwine together. But if it's perceived as complex, but I can try it, hey, it's not so complex. If I can see someone else who tried it, observe it, and see that they found it not complex, oh, maybe I'll try it because I'm similar to that person, which then goes back to segmentation. So if I know that this group of people are similar, then at least theoretically, you should be able to say that if Susie tried it and thought it was complex but loves it, then Tom, who's similar to Susie, will feel the same way. So you can then basically group those people together. Number 4 is relative advantage. And relative advantage is the degree with, it's hard to say that kind of weird. The relative advantage is the degree to which a wellness initiative is perceived as superior to what currently exists. So for some people, there's nothing out there. But for others, you have competing wellness initiatives. And some just have initiatives to have them on the books. So the premise of relative advantage is that you have to me, this is a communication tool. And this is all about communicating the competitive advantage of doing one wellness initiative over another, going back to your segmentation. And so when you communicate that, you have to be able then to say to someone, here's how it benefits you. Here's how being part of this team, this group, this competition benefits you. And that has to be clear. See, what's great about social media and what's great about digital media in terms of emailing, Twitter and all that, is you can customize a lot of messages. And so with mail filters, for example, email filters, I can set up on the back end messages that are targeted towards specific groups, even around the same concept. So there's a lot of research that says that priming individuals is quite easy to do with words. So if I want you to think about happy thoughts, I'll use vernacular that has happy language. If I want you to think about sad thoughts, I'll actually use vernacular that has sad language. So think about the vernacular that you're using in your communication strategies to communicate that relative advantage, to prime them to think a certain way. And so kind of going back to what Lisa said earlier about the Virgin Pulse seminar, one of the best ways to do this is to have a multiple prong approach. And so that goes back to saying that not any one specific wellness initiative is going to attract a majority of your population. It's almost never going to happen. Now, I'll give you a caveat. And the caveat's going to be that if you have some sort of initiative around a philanthropic endeavor, that is one way to get a large portion of your population to partake in a wellness activity. Now, we mostly see this around couch to 5Ks, walking events, running events, around a nonprofit that the organization raises money for, and then the consumers go, or the consumers, and then the employees go out and they partake in that. So one of the things that my organization tries to do is they try to capitalize on that. And that I like to discuss with organizations that is the kickoff activity. Kickoff activity is around a philanthropic event because you're going to capture the largest amount of people to do that event, whatever that event is. And at the end of that event, if your organization deems it a success and you want to continue that, then you have another philanthropic activity. So maybe you have 3 or 4 charities that your organization is really in tune with. And I think you use those. They don't have to be competing. I think too often organizations hang their hat on one charity and that's it. And I don't think that's fair. There's a lot of great charities out there that need help.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in there too, I know in looking at Zappos, they're very good at this, and they promote their, those philanthropic and corporate social responsibility. And just to put, for example, a plug in on our program for a second, in our last program, as some know, to qualify in our master level, they do a group certification project. And what was interesting, I challenged the group last time to come up with a CSR related project. So we very much try and speak to and address in our program all the different dimensions of corporate wellness, corporate, CSR being one of them, and community well-being. And they actually very nicely and very creatively developed a project called Project Warm Up that the employees brought in seniors to the organization and had a fun fitness active event for seniors. And it was brilliant. And I was just so enthralled. And the where they took the project and how they involved the employees in the project and the benefits and community, service that they provided to the seniors who can be a neglected population, right? So I just wanted to throw that out as another like CSR related event that maybe it fits in with what you're talking about here.
Yeah, and let's talk about that from another. Let's take it one step further. What happens, and this kind of gets to my next slide, but what happens to the organization when you do these events? What does it do with the relationships? What does it do with the attitudes? And so if there's a way to do that once a quarter, maybe even semi-annual, then that is a way to get people around an idea or a concept. Philanthropic endeavors that people do. We all know someone or know of someone who's had cancer. So that activity personally impacts everybody. So now going back to self-determination theory then, throughout all of this, and somehow this got slotted into the presentation, but that's all right, I like it, is that when people feel like they're part of a group, and there's another component of self-determination theory that's kind of come upon over the last 10 years, which is purpose. So when people feel like they're part of a group and there's this purpose underlying the whole process, that drives people to feel like they belong. Belongingness is critical for feeling confident that the people around you support you and trust you. That also then builds a sense of autonomy as well. So it all goes together. But this leads to the 5th one, compatibility. And compatibility, in essence, is does your wellness program match my own personal norms and culture? Is it compatible with it? So if you're a highly active institution, organization, everyone does 5Ks, triathlons, and you're somebody who's slightly overweight, maybe that doesn't match. Maybe you feel like you're out of place. Conversely, if your organization is predicated on the idea that giving, philanthropic, is one of their major wellness or well-being initiatives, but you're not one of those people, then perhaps it doesn't match your compatibility of who you are. And so being compatible with those wellness initiatives, or actually instituting wellness initiatives that are compatible with your organization culture, is really important. And so, one of the things that I say is how this all comes together, Lisa, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is the notion of understanding your corporate culture is going to drive everything you do with your wellness initiatives. And that's where the compatibility is really important. Is, do you truly fundamentally in your heart understand what your organization is about? That is important. What's also important is, does senior management set the tone for that corporate culture? So there are two major philosophies: ground up or top down, right? So people try to argue that, let's get the employees engaged in the wellness initiatives or well-being initiatives, and that will permeate itself on the way up. I think that's very impactful, but there'll be a point where that stops. There'll be a point where there's not financial support for it. There'll be a point where perhaps the management doesn't want to give you time off to do X, Y, and Z, or doesn't support that lunchtime walking group, or that lunchtime run group, or that lunchtime yoga group, and then it really squashes that endeavor. Yeah, so for me, the most important thing, if you can have a dual approach, top down, bottom up, great. But it really has to start with senior level managers. That will set the tone to create the compatibility within your corporate culture.
Yeah, and can I just jump in here for a minute? Because again, this speaks to something that very aptly was presented yesterday in the Virgin Pulse, and I'm putting in a plug for Virgin Pulse, I realize, but that's okay. It was a good webinar. And I've heard this from other presenters and other people in our program, in our ambassador program, and one of our presenters, who actually was a Ph.D., I won't say her name, she wished to remain anonymous, but she said in her presentation that, and Virgin Pulse reiterated this yesterday, it's not often the C-suite, the senior level, they get it. They're very much, they work from that 10,000-foot level of the corporate culture. It's the typical, it's the middle managers who, again, they work on a quarterly basis, cost containment, right, in their benefits, or, in this context, in the wellness space. And so what would you say to that in terms of how do we get engagement and involvement and that commitment and belonging and everything else of the middle managers? So when our employees are going to the gym and taking an extra 10 minutes, they don't feel they got to scurry back really quick, 10 minutes past their lunch break for fear that their middle manager or their direct manager is going to say something or out them for it,
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, by the way. And it's not enough, though, to me, and again, this is probably my self-righteous attitude probably coming out. It's not enough for me to say that the C-suite gets it. The bigger question is, does the C-suite do it? So I have seen organizations where the C-suite is all about wellness. Now, for whatever their own reason, it could be to lower healthcare costs, it could be culture, but do they partake in it? Are they part of the process? Or are they simply stating that they want this done? And so that's part of the caveats to that statement in terms of middle management. And I would argue that if the C-suite truly believed it and they did it, they would then support the middle managers in also facilitating that process as well. If they say it's a cost-cutting issue in terms of healthcare cost, and I see this, then there's no support for middle managers to want to do it because they're still worried about the end result or the quarterly result.
Yeah.
So yes, absolutely, middle management is critical in flowing that down. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to jump in there again, sorry for cutting you off, but I think, even if there is that intention there, that the vernacular or the corporate message from C-suite that they support it, it's there in all their wellness policies and their postage signage around the organization, what have you. The reality is we now know that, quarterly, we're driven in organizations by quarterly, bottom line, right? That's reality. On all fronts, wellness to, our
I
whatever.
strongly dislike that.
I know, but it's a reality of the
I
world.
totally agree. Totally
Reality
agree.
of what we live in. So I guess I'm trying, just taking this a little step further to see if we can come up with a brilliant answer or solution here. Maybe not in an hour presentation, but certainly with respect to what can we do from a tactical measure? What can a C-suite, a senior level CEO, COO, whomever, do from a tactical level to really impress upon middle management to really support? So to come back to my example, that it's okay, like to come back to the results oriented work environment, right? Where they manage by objectives, they manage by results and not by punching the clock.
So let me flip this around then.
Okay.
And I think this is a really important conversation to have, and I don't think it's going to be solved in this 50-minute webinar. But there's a lot of research out there that discusses the fact that 9-hour workdays aren't productive. It discusses the fact that 8-hour workdays aren't as productive. What is productive is that so this is twofold for me. So one is that the reality is that we seem to think in the U.S. culture, and I'm not anti-U.S. I just happen to live in Australia and in Japan, and I've seen both sides of that. And there's a lot of research about the Norwegian countries and their philosophy of work. And here's a great example. There's been a movement in Sweden to do 6-hour workdays. Now that just blows most people's minds. 6 hours, I couldn't get anything done. But they have some rules with that. So in the 6 hours, you can only check email at the morning and at lunch, and then you must go by 3 o'clock. Okay? The other rule is that no social media during the day. Can't check any of that personal stuff. And what they have found already is that the results are actually much better for productivity because people come in focused to get that stuff done. So first of all, I think that we expect people to work way too much and do work way too long. Too much isn't the right word. Way too long. I don't think it's human nature to sit at a desk for 8 hours to be focused. Totally think that's not who we are as human beings. But secondly, from a middle management standpoint, for me, I'm going to quote Dr. Phil, which, maybe that's not right. But, Dr. Phil always states that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And for me, what that means is that if C-suite believe in it and want a wellness initiative, well-being initiative to be enacted, then their actions will speak to that. And those actions being, it's okay to be 10 minutes late. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to have realistic expectations. And I know that sounds pie in the sky, and I get that that's nowhere near where we're at right now in our society. So I'm not in utopia land of business environment. I get it. But the reality is that we as a country, and I think Canada is probably a bit better as a country in terms of the U.S., we are completely unhealthy on a majority of our organizations in terms of what we expect. And until we realize that when people spend 8 hours a day doing anything, they're not going to be productive for a big chunk of that time. And big chunk meaning 20 or 30%. So for me, getting to middle managers, it doesn't change if they don't feel, because there's lip service and there's action. And I think that's my big thing, right? Is that there's a lot of lip service, but the action is not backed up by the senior suite. And so I'm hard pressed to think that any senior level employee who believes in well-being and wellness, if they truly believe in it, their actions will speak louder. Not their personal actions, the environment they create in that organization to allow that person to feel supported to do those things and to pull them aside and say, listen, you need to take better care of yourself, because I think that is critical. Now, again, that's pie in the sky because, as a dad of 4, my workouts have gone down dramatically as each kid has come aboard. So I understand that's not easy, but I still slice out time to do as best I can. And so, I think tactically is a tough question because the tactics are driven from the senior level, and they're going to say that these are what's important. And then from a middle manager, they've got to take that strategy and implement it. Well, the problem is that if the support's not there, then they can't implement it. I can use organizations as an example where senior levels say we want to have these initiatives, but they give them no support to do those initiatives. And I'm not even talking about the middle manager's ability to go off and do whatever they want to do. I'm talking about also the financial support to do those things, because that's not enough. And I mean financial support meaning enough money to bring in the appropriate wellness vendors, to bring in the appropriate structures from an operational standpoint, not an incentive standpoint. And that's a different conversation. And so to kind of tie this all together, kind of starting off the top, consumer behavior provides many lessons for wellness professionals. I think that, we in the marketing realm have spent a lot of time understanding why people eat one apple versus another apple, right? Something as simple as putting fruit out instead of a candy jar has a drastic impact on a organizational environment. So I've seen many organizations that have fresh fruit delivered every day. That's something so simple that's encouraging a healthy behavior. So I've been in organizations where they have candy bars, and man, I'll consume the heck out of those. And if they have fruit, well then you know what? It's probably a better choice. So I'll have the apple instead, or the banana, or whatever it is. So I think that's one way to do it. I've also had, I've interviewed an individual named Greg Mataski from Gregory FCA. It's a local PR firm. And they have fresh breakfast every Wednesday morning. So they have a chef come in, make omelets, make yogurt, stuff like that. That's all fresh and healthy for their employees. He got that from Bloomberg. So they went up to Bloomberg up in New York, and that's what Bloomberg does. Every morning for employees, they have fresh breakfast there.
And if I could just jump in, I mean, for a lot of companies that may be cost prohibitive. So what's to say then that they couldn't do self-organize and have, employees bring in their own healthy breakfast and do a little buffet breakfast in the mornings, right? As an example.
And I agree. And I think that, that comes with caveats, because then you're asking them to do it. And I think that that's then putting cost on them. So if that's part of the corporate culture that everyone rotates through, then that's totally cool. But as an organization, I think you have to think about, and again, this is size dependent, right? There's so many variables that go into that. But if it's an organization of 1,000 people, what is, every Wednesday spending $1,000 on fruit and veg? What does that mean if it's healthier employees? I don't know. For me, that's not a lot.
Yeah.
So the other thing to this then is obviously consumer behavior provides many lessons. Number 2, unknown barriers can cause wellness adoption to fail. So these unknown barriers are things like the complexity, the ability to observe it. Is it compatible with who I am? Is there a relative advantage to me actually partaking in one initiative versus another? Number 3 is, take the path of least resistance. It can have the best outcomes. I think that's a really important lesson. I think too often we as a society, as individuals, get caught up in our own mind of what's the best path to get something done. Internally in an organization, that can also then create some sort of stagnation in terms of getting or accomplishing the end goal. And the end goal for many, many organizations, if it's not, it should be, the end goal should be to create a healthy work environment. I'm going to quote John Robinson here, and too often he says that wellness is done to, not for employees. And I think that's a really important distinction, that you're creating an environment for the employees because they're really important for you. And finally, forcing an initiative that is antithetical to the culture will get you right back to the start. And what I'm talking about is provide initiatives, well-meaning or not, and I'm going to go with well-meaning. If they aren't in line with the culture of the organization, you're just spinning your wheels. And I want to say something that I've been really pounding my chest on recently that kind of goes throughout all of this. And the big thing that we have to think about, there's this core marketing philosophy or organizational philosophy strategy, and it's called triple bottom line. A triple bottom line is very simple. It states that if you are financially responsible, if you are socially responsible to your community, and you're environmentally responsible to basically things like recycling, so environmentally responsible to the environment, then it should return a higher percentage to the shareholders. I actually argue for a 4th component to that, and that is, are you responsible to your employees? Are you taking time to care for the people who are essentially earning you money? And so my new thing is a quadruple bottom line, and that's employee responsibility. Are you responsible to taking care of your own employees for their own personal well-being and health? For whatever that means for your organization. Again, there's no one size that fits all. But it's critical that, are you taking that next step? And for me, what it appears to be on the horizon, what appears to be currently, is that is a very big struggle to take that next step. And what I would argue is that on the horizon in the next 20 years, that will be the next step. I feel that as a nation, Canada is probably included in this as well. we're about 20 or 30 years behind Europe in terms of how they treat their employees. And that's a generalization. I think there's always caveats, and there's always organizations that are better or worse than others. But on the whole, I think that we are probably 20 years behind Europe when it comes to things like paid family leave, when it comes to things like time off, comes to things like wellness initiatives, taking care of each other. So at the end of the day, I think that it's really important that we understand that there are several different capacities that get in the way of people or individuals or employees adopting a wellness initiative. You need to ask yourself if what you're doing is too complex. Can they try it? Can they see how it works? Is there an advantage to them? And is it compatible to who they are as an individual? And if you can accomplish those 5 things, I would argue that your engagement level will actually go up. I'm not going to wed myself to a percentage, but it's going to go up. So do you have any questions?
I do, and probably way too many for the remaining minutes. I try and keep these presentations to within an hour, but I think the audience, it's been fascinating. I'm sure they'll bear with us for a few more minutes, or they can always opt to come back at another point or not continue, whatever the case may be. First off, thank you so much, James. You, I wasn't sure. I had to be honest when you presented the topic. I thought, oh, this is going to be a little dry, and but really, you really nailed a lot of things right on the head, as to quote that common used expression. And I like how you brought that SDT to self-determination theory, and apologize maybe for throwing that in and putting you on your.
No, that's great.
But you did a very good job at bringing that in, and I think it in the end really played in and fit well in how you brought it together.
Thank you.
So, are there any other challenges in organizations? And I have a couple remaining questions, and then we'll clue up here. That organizations might encounter when implementing some of these strategies that you've presented here today. And
I think that any organization will have some pushback if it's something new and different. I think that's human nature. I think human nature is such that our first response, I always think of being a parent, right? Mm-hmm. Our first response is always to say no.
Right.
So when you think about that from an organization standpoint, and you think about the adoption process, there's another part of this I didn't really talk about, but you have what are called innovators, early adopters,
right?
Early majority, late majority, and laggards.
Right.
And so in the organization, you're going to have people that kind of come across that bell curve. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, there's going to be challenges.
Right, for sure.
And I would say that that's okay. If it's worth the fight.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And just quickly moving on, then, why do you think some organizations have yet to really truly embrace consumer behavior as a tool?
I don't think most people know about it.
Okay.
I think that you also have to think about the individuals who tend to head this up. Mm-hmm. It usually is at the VP of HR level, director of HR level, chief human resource officer. They aren't trained in consumer behavior.
Right.
Most of them are trained in organizational psychology. And again, huge overlap, mm-hmm. but that doesn't talk about how people consume something. And that's that next step that I think is really critical in the process. Right.
And I like how you brought in the 5 steps. And certainly, of course, putting the context and examples behind it always helps, as you did. So lastly, then, how might, and this, obviously part of the reason I do these series is to provide, in part, as I shared with you before recording this, is to provide an educational tool to our ambassadors, and also this will go into our ambassador program in our archive of presentations as additional instructional tools for training them in workplace wellness, leadership, and what have you. So how might our certified ambassadors and our master ambassadors apply your consumer behavior strategies in their work as either internal wellness champions, internal chairs of committees, internal HR who wear the hat also maybe of a wellness coordinator, or some of our ambassadors also, many of them work as independent wellness consultants and coaches and coordinators, what have you, with their employer clients. So how might our ambassadors, take what you've presented today and apply it in their work, and in using it maybe to help market themselves to employers?
That is a really fantastic question.
I'll put you on the spot now, right?
No. It's a great question. It forces me to think this through a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I would say to that. I think that there's nothing that I've talked about tonight or today that is rocket science.
Right.
And that if you use the 5 adoption ideals that I'm using here as a framework for what you're trying to accomplish, and you can ask yourself these questions. Is it complex?
Mm-hmm.
Can they try it out? Can they observe the successes? Is it compatible for who they are? And is there a relative advantage? If you can ask yourself those questions again and again and again, that's the framework of success to me.
Right.
And
So
I think that,
if I may just quickly, sorry to cut you off, but when you say ask themselves, so ask themselves in the context of how, in each context of each particular employer, let's just say they're an independent consultant. So they
as they
ask,
go to a consultant and you have a dialogue with their HR staff,
right,
the employees in the HR department, you can ask them question is, how complex is this to get involved in? How many steps do they have to take? Can we keep it more simple? Can your employees try this out initially if there's a commitment to it?
right,
Is it possible to do trials at all in? If it's all in, maybe you should think about a trial.
mm-hmm.
Can they see the champions of this particular activity, the observational standpoint? Because if they can't see the champions, then they don't know the possible success they can have.
Right.
You know, can someone tangibly in their mind see the advantage of doing this particular initiative versus another initiative? And then finally, are you actually employing things that's in line with your actual corporate culture?
Right.
Now, some of this stuff can be done by surveys, and that's a whole other conversation. But you
Right.
can research a lot of this stuff as well,
Mm-hmm.
using constructs and ideas that are in the literature.
Mm-hmm.
But that requires another level of sophistication. So if you're a consultant, you need to ask yourself that when you go down this path, can you do it qualitatively or can you do it quantitatively?
Right.
And a little bit of both is probably important.
Right. And, again, obviously to put in a bit of promo for your business, is this a level of service that if an employer wanted to take this a step further and consult with a company such as yourself, Brave Endurance, is this a level of service that you could work with, an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's as we launch this awesome webinar, that is kind of where we're moving, is more into that space, because it speaks volumes to my skill set.
Right.
I mean, I'm an endurance sports guy. I've done triathlons and all that, and I think there's a definite niche in that business. But I think this is what people struggle with, is how to set things up and how to think about it differently than how they already think about it in terms of wellness initiatives.
And on that being said, before we conclude, I definitely would like to extend the invite to you to come and be one of our presenters in our program at some point. And I think you have a really poignant message to bring to our ambassadors.
I'd be honored, absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great. So thank you, James. Is there any final words of wisdom you want to leave before we conclude here today?
The only thing I can say is just be honest, be authentic, do your best, and nothing's easy. But if it's worth fighting for it, fight for it.
Right. Well, James, it has been quite a delight. And when you're ready, I'll just have you advance the slide here just to conclude our presentation.
Yes.
And just to one more slide maybe there.
Yeah.
There. Thank you very much. So for the benefit of our viewers, again, if you liked what we talked about today and you're involved in the workplace wellness space, or maybe you're a health coach or someone in HR, even an office administrator, we have all walks of life come into our programs, and you can certainly learn more about our target markets for our program and who would be a good fit for the program by going to kelleywc.com. Certainly email me at info@kelleywc.com. Our next program will be offered, our ambassador and master ambassador programs, beginning April 4th. They're a 10-week program. And we would love to have you either inquire further or join our program when we start up again. And so that being said, I'd like to, conclude our presentation. And James, it has been a delight. And as always, I'm a little sad because after I finished our podcast, I knew I'd have this other interview. But maybe I have another opportunity now to have you come on as a guest presenter to our program. And that would be another pure delight. So thank you.
Well, Lisa, can I just add thank you very much? And what you're doing with the ambassador program is really quite remarkable, and I think you'll get success from this. So congratulations on what you're doing as well.
Well, and I appreciate that. And we've got some really new, exciting initiatives and corporate, program growth happening, literally as we speak. And there's been a global interest. We have, people from Nigeria, Hong Kong, all through the U.S., Canada, and other countries involved in our program. And just the networking alone through the program is just incredible. So I'm quite thrilled, and I get to work with people like yourself, which is always an added bonus. So thank you so much, James, and good luck with everything. Good luck with your family, and keep working on that good fight for work-life balance. Stick with the yoga programs, and I'm sure you need that. You need that come up for air, right? And
yes. Thank you. Have a great day, Lisa.
You too. Alrighty, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.